Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. So, okay, if I was to tell you that in 2019, there was a USA Network drama set in the world of Jason Bourne called Treadstone, how many of you would even remember hearing about that? My guess is not that many of you. And even if you have heard of it, you probably didn't watch, as the show was unceremoniously cancelled after only 10 episodes. As of right now, that's the last we've heard of the Jason Bourne franchise, a film franchise that was, at one point, easily one of the most beloved action series of the 2000s, and now just feels gone. I don't see that many people talking about Bourne these days. While James Bond and Mission Impossible continued to produce spy movie after spy movie, Bourne seems to have fallen off the map. So I thought it would be worth revisiting this week, to talk about why people loved these movies, and why attempts to reignite the franchise just haven't worked. In 2002, James Bond was feeling about as tacky and dated as he ever had. The Pierce Brosnan era, which had kicked off so successfully with 1995's GoldenEye, was now feeling a little stale and on its last legs, thanks mostly to that year's Die Another Day, which saw the franchise at its most over-the-top and ridiculous, and not really in a fun way either. It just felt bloated and pandering, like an aging dinosaur trying to reassure the kids that it was still cool, which gave us sequences like Bond surfing a tsunami with the help of some truly terrible CG. But that same year also brought two new films, eager to position themselves as spy movies for the new 21st century, tossing out the old tropes of 007 and ushering in something different. And they went about doing that in radically different ways. One of those films was the Bourne Identity, and the other was Vin Diesel's XXX. Bourne represented a more grounded, paranoid, and serious take on the genre, stripping away the excess and silliness of 007 and leaving us with a lean, somewhat more grim story set in the world of assassination and espionage. XXX went in the other direction and tried to create a Bond-like character that did away with the tailored suits and martinis and replaced them with extreme sports and Red Bull. I mean, this was 2002, the X Games were huge, Vin Diesel looked far more like an action hero than Matt Damon, who was probably still best known back then for Good Will Hunting. It just seemed reasonable to assume that XXX would come out on top. And it actually did, grossing a bit more at the worldwide box office. But it was Bourne who would go on to reshape action cinema for the next decade. The funny thing is, the handheld, ultra-shaky cam style the series is now known for and really helped push to the forefront of blockbuster movies isn't actually present in the Bourne Identity. This was the only film in the series directed by Doug Liman, who would go on to make the great Edge of Tomorrow and the slightly less great Jumper. And honestly, this still might be my favorite film in the series. I think the story is at its least convoluted and most emotionally resonant here, with Damon's Bourne being saved by some fishermen and completely unable to remember who he is. The action scenes are shot in a well-executed but detached style that feel like a far cry from the more stylized stuff you'd see in a Bond movie, XXX, or Mission Impossible 2. The movie makes significant changes from Robert Ludlum's 1980 novel, but does manage to keep the tone more or less intact. And of course, it retains the assassin with amnesia plot, which is a pretty amazing hook for a paranoid thriller. The movie didn't give the world Bourne fever or anything, but it came out to good reviews, decent box office numbers, and really solid home video numbers. The next film, The Bourne Supremacy, replaced Liman with the man who would become the franchise's star director, Paul Greengrass. Greengrass was a former UK journalist turned filmmaker, and his indie film about the 1972 massacre in Northern Ireland, Bloody Sunday, had impressed critics like Roger Ebert, who praised the film and especially its camera work, saying, "A sense of immediate and present reality permeates every scene." Now that sense was achieved through the use of a lot of shaky cam, which Greengrass was eager to put to use again in his first big-budget American film. Now these days, I feel like public opinion has really shifted against Greengrass's ultra-shaky style. And it's easy to hold that against the Bourne films, especially Supremacy, which should probably come with a motion sickness warning. But back in 2004, it really did feel fresh and different. It has some really exciting action scenes that evoke that sense of immediacy that Greengrass was going for. It is kind of hard to tell what's going on in some places, but you could argue that's part of the point. It's supposed to feel chaotic and disorienting. I have to admit though, I kind of miss the more straightforward approach of Lyman, who I don't think gets enough credit for just how good the action is in Identity. Where Identity feels very matter-of-fact about violence, Supremacy tends to turn it into more of a roller coaster.
When the hunted turns into the hunter, become the perfect weapon.
The Bourne Ultimatum is, to this day, the highest grossing Bourne movie. I remember being incredibly excited to see this in theaters. And unlike every Bourne film since, it really felt like an event. And it didn't disappoint either, giving us the best action scenes that Greengrass has ever put on screen, a great score, and a script that managed to cleverly pull together the first two films in a satisfying way. Critics loved it, audiences loved it, it won 3 Oscars. It was a really great culmination of the franchise, and wrapped things up pretty perfectly. Maybe a little too perfectly if you were Universal, who didn't want to see a profitable franchise end. Greengrass and Damon weren't interested in revisiting the series anytime soon. But of course, after years of starts and stops, the Bourne-less movie, The Bourne Legacy, stumbled its way into theaters in 2012. At least the screenwriter of the earlier films, Tony Gilroy, was back, and this time he was in the director's chair too. Which I vaguely remember actually had me excited. I mean, the guy directed Michael Clayton, one of the best movies of 2007. But the Bourne Legacy, it just doesn't land. I don't hate the movie or anything. I actually think Jeremy Renner and especially Rachel Weisz are pretty solid here. But watching this, there's always this nagging feeling that the movie just doesn't need to exist. Probably not helped by the fact that the characters keep talking about the events of Bourne Ultimatum, which were happening off screen. I get they wanted to tie it into those films, but seriously, if you bring up Jason Bourne constantly, you're just gonna remind everyone that he's not in the movie. And Renner's Aaron Cross just doesn't have an interesting hook in the way that Bourne did. There's so much intrigue and exposition in this movie, but it's all in service of a story that has almost no emotional weight to it. Without Bourne's journey of self-discovery, what are we even left with? Judging by Legacy and the next 2 Bourne projects, not much. Now when it first came out, I had completely skipped out on Bourne Legacy, but I remember being a little bit more excited for Jason Bourne, Greengrass and Damon's return to the series in 2016. I ended up sleeping through it on a plane and not actually watching the entire thing until this week. And you know what? I don't really regret that. This might be a hot take, but I don't think it's as good as Legacy. Now, it's not some super embarrassing failure or anything. I don't think they've ever made a Bourne film that's like notably bad. But man, these characters are hard to care about. The amnesia that drove Bourne in the first 3 films is far in the rearview mirror now, and that's kind of a problem. Bourne, as we find him here, is just not a very interesting character to me. He's so far from the Jason we get in Bourne Identity, who is slowly discovering with horror that he might have been an awful person and falling into this cold, brutal world of espionage. In this film, that's all that's left. The things that made his journey interesting, to me at least, are gone. And what we have now is an endless trail of shadow government agencies, corporations, and double crosses that I found pretty impossible to care about. I like the score, the action is good enough, especially if you're a fan of Greengrass's style, but there's nothing for me to latch onto here. It's a really cold movie, filled with tons of plot, and almost no one to care about. In the end, I think the real legacy of Bourne is the impact that it had on the rest of action cinema. Movies like Batman Begins, and especially Casino Royale, exists, I think at least in part, because studios saw that this more grounded, serious approach to action filmmaking could be embraced by the public. I don't think Craig's Bond would exist at all if the producers of the 007 films hadn't seen in Bourne a new direction to take that character in. The shaky cam and gritty action of these films went on to help define action cinema in the latter half of the 2000s. And while XXX now feels like a charming 2002 artifact, the Bourne Identity, with its grounded action and surveillance state paranoia, has aged really well. But I also think there's a good reason why the franchise has never done that well after Ultimatum, and why USA's Treadstone failed so miserably. Unlike James Bond, who you can easily slot into a new adventure, Jason Bourne was interesting because he's at war with who he used to be. The amnesia is the element of the story that sets it apart from being a generic spy thriller. And once that's gone, you just don't have that much to work with. I only watched the pilot of Treadstone, which was written by Heroes creator Tim Kring, but it gave me the same feeling that Legacy did, only way more so. Why does this need to exist? I care about Jason Bourne's journey that kicks off on that fisherman's boat, but I've never really been able to care about the endless shadowy intrigue of Treadstone and its employees. And if the cancellation of the show is anything to go by, I don't think I'm alone. One of the things I really enjoyed in these movies, though, is revisiting all the then state-of-the-art 2000s technology, which was pretty fun. Speaking of, if you have any interest in computers or computer science, let me recommend Brilliant. I've been enjoying learning more about computer science, but that's far from all they have to teach you, as Brilliant covers a huge range of subjects. Not by making you memorize formulas and repeating them over and over, but by creating really engaging questions for you to use your critical thinking skills to solve. I never actually took a computer science class in school, and I found the whole subject pretty intimidating. But things like Brilliant's daily challenges on the app do a great job of making those concepts approachable, by helping me build on the skills I already have in a way that's fun and fits into my schedule, which makes them actually enjoyable to learn. So to build on your knowledge with Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/midnight and sign up for free. The first 200 people to go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.